As probably most of us are aware, there's a lot of talk today about the relevance of religion in modern times, the historicity of Jesus, how scientifically based is atheism, how credible is Christianity. Apologetics, atheistic counter-arguments and rebuttals and all that jazz drive thinking individuals to the point of relative craziness. In this short piece, I'll try to put an order to the mess and see where we are currently standing in relation to the objective truth, where logic stops and fantasy begins, in a hope to bring some order to the chaos of modern, complex labyrinths of contradicting evidence and subjective views. First, let's examine the undeniable facts, the possibilities of life being a mere accident in this one universe are not just small, they are simply non-existent. Most of you probably have heard that the chances of a random cosmic explosion like the Big Bang to accidentally create the ideal conditions for life are minimal at best. However, here we don't just talk about the creation of a mindless living organism. We are talking about the genius of man being accidental, and people like Einstein, Rembrandt, Mozart, Da Vinci or Callas being nothing more than random occurrences caused by a bizarre accident. I will leave to lovers of statistics to calculate the exact possibility of that happening at random in a sole universe by an accidental explosion. So the series of events goes like this: bang, life, Einstein and Mozart, out of sheer damn luck. Obviously, that's kind of a completely idiotic idea, so the atheist scientists like Professor Dawkins and his merry band of atheist supporters came up with a fun idea of a multiverse, meaning an endless space of countless universes, where every combination of atoms and particles is possible. To put it plainly, there is another universe where I've won the lottery, I became rich, and I live in a majestic mansion by the sea somewhere on an exotic island. Not before long, I've had a discussion in Facebook with a very nice and polite atheist who suggested that if God exists, then I may as well believe there's a pink unicorn in his basement. Unfortunately, however, if Professor Dawkins is right, there's a universe out there where unicorns do exist, and why not in a variety of colors, from pink to light green with purple spots. Dragons are also a definite possibility, and why not fairies? After all, what else are fairies but tiny women with butterfly wings and fancy dresses? I'm not joking at all. That's the logical consequence of this argument. If every possible combination of atoms and particles exists in some faraway remote universe, then there is definitely a universe where the whole evolution event has unfolded differently, and therefore every possible monstrous and horrific creature can and must exist. In short, as long as we can go on believing that God does not exist, we may believe in unicorns, fairies, and the flying cookie monster, and Santa Claus with his happy elves. I think you all see where I'm getting at. So, in my opinion, if someone prefers to believe in fairies but not in God, as the evidence indicate, that's his problem, but he'd better stop fooling himself into believing that's actually a logical choice and face the fact that he's scared to death, that if there is a supreme entity supervising the whole thing, he and some of his friends are in serious trouble and they'd better change their lives. So, let's examine some more equally interesting atheistic arguments. How can an immensely benevolent, wise and almighty God allow injustice in his world, like the beating and abuse of all kinds to women and children, deadly sickness, wars, famines, and every other sort of unhappiness? Though I have answered this previously, I will do it again, so that no one can act as if I hadn't said it. God as a supreme being is above our own limited human morality and can use all sorts of evil and injustice as long as the end is a perfect triumph of goodness. The world, as it was first created, was a flawless piece of marble for the divine sculptor, and he aims to form it to a work of art, a cosmic statue of immense beauty. And of course, when God gave us freedom, He gave us perfect freedom, including the right to deny it and become slaves of sin. And He did come as God the Son to give us the ability to reclaim our freedom through His Word, and sacrificed Himself in order for us to be able to hear this saving Word and implement it, despite the system's counterattack of lies aimed at obscuring and hiding the truth. No one can say that God doesn't care for our suffering, since we're all parts of Him. Therefore, He feels our pain as deeply as we do. Another question relative to the first is why God, with all His might, couldn't form the cosmic statue from the beginning without man having to go through this whole imperfection in order to arrive at that point of triumphant goodness. The answer, of course, must be that God is not a computer geek behind the screen writing algorithms. He's a divine creator, and He wants man, His creature, to become a loving, grateful child by choice, and not because there is no other path for him but submission. So what role plays hell in all of this? Frankly, if you had a rotting member, you would cut it off to save the rest of your body and your life. It would hurt, but it wouldn't be as bad as dying, so you would do it. It's the same with sin. It needs to be cut off in order to stop the pollution from spreading to our whole universal being. It's not pleasant, but it is necessary, and naturally, a rotting limb would have to be thrown into the fire and not out in the street to gather flies and stink. That cleansing fire is hell, and it is reserved for those who denied salvation, though they had the means to save themselves through the words of Christ. The divine spark of godly existence is in everyone coming into this world, but some choose to bury it, and that's their own responsibility. So what of all the improbabilities and the apparent cruelty in the Old Testament? The Old Testament, like any other spiritual text, uses vivid imagery to convey its meaning, and though it's not necessarily all historical, it gets the job done. It provides a moral code to a creature deprived of the innocence and natural goodness it came endowed with into this world. On the other hand, the New Testament actually provides something more meaningful and deeper, an existential therapy, so that we can return to the precious unity with God. And that's the reason Christianity is the only credible choice, because the New Testament is the natural occurrence after the Old. It provides true goodness in the place of mere morality, and it calls us to become once more the happy children we once were, to cut our bonds to the past and stop worrying about the future, thus living in an eternal present moment of happiness with our Heavenly Father. So what about the similarities with other older religions and the Christian narration of the virgin birth and other events? In reality, it doesn't make one bit of difference if parts of the narration are fictional and used to make Christianity more appealing to idolaters and followers of other religions. What matters is the teaching, that frankly is highly unlikely to be so perfect in the existential sense and be the creation of some imaginative men who sacrifice their lives for a mere fairy tale of their own invention. But I suspect that my theological argument sounds like Greek to someone who doesn't believe in God, so I will return to the hard logical facts that seem to delight atheists and agnostics, thinking naively that in that ball field they are completely safe and free to deny the existence of God as long as they like. So how do we know there is an eternal soul or life after death? Modern science has proved that the brain produces the inner experience, and a simple change of the chemical balance can affect the way we perceive the world. A brain malfunction or a surgical removal of a brain part can render us incapable of doing anything, perceiving color, sounds, or anything else. I'm afraid that fact only proves that the brain is an indispensable organ for the expression of the mind and soul, but it does by no means prove that there isn't a soul or a mind that actually uses the brain to express itself. It's an organ like the hand or the eye, not the source of our consciousness, but the means by which the immaterial consciousness interacts with the physical world. The fact that the 12-year-old Jesus had wisdom enough to teach at the temple shows that he had a sense of the central role he was to play in the world from a time before his birth, and what's more impressive is that his life and his teaching proved he really did have that role, and he was willing to sacrifice his very life to serve his divine purpose. By what means would someone forsake his own existence and instinct of self-preservation in order to serve a greater purpose if we were nothing more than evolved amoebas? Surely, self-sacrifice for the truth and for others is not something amoebas are so fond of doing. So if God truly is the creator of this incredibly complex world, he needs to be more complex himself, and if nothing comes from nothing, where did he come from? My answer will be short and to the point. Nothing comes from nothing is our experience of the material world. So the precise thing to say is that nothing material comes from nothing, and consequently the beginning of things must be non-material or spiritual. However, modern quantum physics has observed that causes and effects are not as linear and clear as the Aristotelian logic dictates. If that's true for the material world, how much more it can and must be the case for the spiritual world. The creator of time needs to be above time in order to create it, and since causes and effects exist only in a linear time frame, that Supreme Being does not need a start or a cause to exist. So why did God need evolution? Why didn't he just pop the world out of thin air? Because evolution is as good a way to create man as any other, and since God is not a cheap magician but a Supreme Being, he needed logic into his world, and the time it took for man to evolve was not so long for a timeless, eternal being. He could afford to wait a few million years, because for him time doesn't exist anyway, as I've mentioned above. Of course, a devout atheist would at this point find refuge in the overused God of the gaps argument. I can't explain it, therefore God. Normally I wouldn't dignify that with an answer, but I'll give it a try. In your case, my dear atheist, it is I cannot explain it, therefore unicorns and fairies. And if you have trouble understanding this, then you haven't read properly my paragraph about the multiverse and what that theory would entail. As for not being any recorded miracles in history, look around you. Our whole existence is inexplicable, and your type of limited logic has absolutely nothing to do with it, and can't begin to comprehend what is really out there. Obviously, at this point, more specific arguments will be expressed of the kind used to put into doubt the goodness of God, based on the apparent cruelty shown in the Old Testament, like what kind of God sends his people, the Israelites, to war, ordering them to butcher the enemies to the last and enslave women and children. Those bringing forth such arguments pretend not to know that the Old Testament was not only a spiritual text but also a national text, meant to unite God's chosen people and keep them from being crushed by the many surrounding enemy tribes. Religion was never solely and clearly spiritual. Orthodox Christianity is not just a spiritual faith for the Greeks and the Russians, but also an inseparable part of their national identity, like Islam is to Turkey. The same was true for the Israelites. So many national necessities were attributed to God. One needs to have the basic discernment and intelligence to tell the clearly spiritual path from the path intended to actually make sure that the Israelites would survive as a nation and their faith to the one God would not be forgotten. So to sum it all up, hard logical facts and not faith shows there is either God or fairies, unicorns and pointy-eared elves, and there is no middle ground. It's either one or the other, or both, but under no circumstance none. Take your pick. The necessity of a brain does not prove the non-existence of mind and soul. God is completely just and offers man the choice between freedom and slavery, and some choose slavery. So God rejects them from his being to save the rest of humanity fairly, after giving them every chance to change. All the harshness in the Old Testament is due to its national significance and cannot be used as an argument against the goodness of God. God does not need a beginning because he is purely spiritual, as one would expect from the creator of all the material world and time itself. And by the way, no, he is not an old man on a throne with a long beard, but the highest cosmic force, and a distinct person with clear motives and an ultimate benevolent purpose. As for a non-material world, don't fret, it exists without a doubt, unless you can prove that specific thoughts and emotions have an equally specific weight, and that if one has many thoughts, or if one is excessively sensitive, one will gain weight without eating a spoonful of material food. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you will show it to anyone to whom it may be useful. Thank you.